In Warsaw, it is over. After 3 days of fighting in the streets of the capital, the government has fallen. President Wojciechowski and the cabinet of Mr. Witos have resigned, and Marshal Piłsudski stands tonight as the master of Poland. In Britain, the strike a week behind it, the labor movement has turned to the bitterest of all its questions. Not what the enemy did, but what its own leaders did. The word being spoken in the coal fields and the union halls is betrayal, and the miners who began it all are locked out still. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Friday, the 14th of May, 1926. The fighting in Warsaw ended 3 days ago. What goes forward now is the reckoning. The counts of the dead are still being gathered, and they are early counts, and they will be revised. The first reports of such a battle seldom hold up whole. What can be set down this evening, with that caution upon it, is that the 3 days of fighting in the streets of the capital cost something more than 200 lives, soldiers and townspeople both, and the townspeople among them in numbers the early lists have not yet agreed upon, and left the better part of 1,000 more in the hospitals of the city wounded. The shells and the rifle fire fell in a capital full of people. A good many of the dead had no part in the quarrel of the marshal and the president. They were merely in the streets of Warsaw in the days when the argument was settled by arms. We mark the figure because of the word now being placed beside it. The marshal supporters have a name for what has been done these 3 days. They call it Sanacja, the healing of the state, the cleansing of public life of the corruption of party and the rot of the parliamentary bargain. It is the word that will be carried at the head of the new order, and the conservative press of the continent has already taken it up, the cleansing of Poland. We report the word as its authors use it. As to the order that now takes shape, the marshal has not seated himself at the head of the state. The presidency he has left for others to fill, and the forming of a cabinet has fallen to Mr. Kazimierz Bartel, summoned to the task by the marshal of the same, Mr. Rataj, who has acted in the place of the president who resigned. Where Piłsudski has kept his hand is upon the army, the instrument that carried him to Warsaw, and the instrument, by every report, that he does not mean to lay down. A man may govern a country without sitting in its highest chair if he holds its soldiers, and that, for the present, appears to be the arrangement the marshal prefers. There remains the question this broadcast has put from the first hour of the rising, and it is the question that matters most to the working people who decided it. The railwaymen who would not carry the government's troops, the socialist workers who raised companies in the working districts and struck the city to order. What have they been given for it? The answer, so far as the answer can be read this evening, is nothing yet and nothing promised. The socialist newspaper, Robotnik, the paper of the very party that threw its strength behind the marshal, conceded but 2 days past that Piłsudski had made no concrete promises, and that what the victory was for had never been made plain even to those who won it. The men closest to the marshal now are not the men of the left who carried him. The working people of Poland have spent their strength, and they wait to learn the price of the spending. We will report it as it comes. To Britain and the coal fields. It is 5 days since the general strike was called off, and the shape of what the calling off left behind is now plain. The strike is over. The lockout is not. The miners stand tonight in the 17th day of it, exactly where they stood on the 1st of May, having gained nothing and conceded nothing. What has changed is everything around them. The 1.5 million who came out in their support have gone back to work, many to worse terms than they left, some not taken back at all. And with the auxiliary trades returned to their benches, the owners and the government are free to do the thing the general strike had prevented them doing, to turn the whole weight of the coal owners, the courts, and the state upon a single industry, and to wait. A lockout is a slow weapon. It is not fought with batons in the street. It is fought with the empty larder and the lengthening week, and it is won, if it is won, by hunger. That is the campaign upon which the British coalfields now enter, and they enter it alone. Alone, that is, but for 1 quarter. From Moscow this evening, the press of the Communist International carries word that the trade unions of the Soviet Union have voted a further sum for the relief of the locked-out British miners, and that the Soviet mine workers, gathered in their own Congress, have sent their greetings and their collections to the men of the British pits. A telegram, we are given to understand, has passed between them and Mr. Cook of the Miners' Federation. There is a history to this aid worth the setting down. When the Soviet trade unions first offered their help in the early days of the strike while the stoppage was whole, the General Council of the Trades Union Congress would not take it. It would not have the strike branded with the charge its enemies were already pressing, the charge of Moscow's gold. And so the offer was returned. The miners have made no such refusal. The aid the Council would not take, the locked-out miner takes. And so the material help reaching the British coalfields in the 3rd week of the lockout comes not from the leadership that called the men out and sent them back, but from the workers of a state 1,000 miles to the east. From Berlin, briefly, a government at last. The German Republic, which has gone since the middle of last week without a cabinet, the government of Chancellor Luther having fallen in the quarrel over the flag, has, we are given to understand, found its successor. Mr. Marx returns to the Chancellorship at the head of a cabinet of the middle parties formed without the nationalists of the right. It is the same arithmetic that has made and unmade German governments since the founding of the Republic, rearranged once more. Whether this arrangement lasts longer than the last is a question Berlin has learned not to ask aloud. And in Passaic, in New Jersey, the strike that is the longest standing of the American labor struggles enters tonight its 17th week. Some 16,000 workers remain out at the woolen mills. Polish, Hungarian, Italian, and Slovak in the main, recent immigrants, and in great number, women. It is worth saying plainly, on a night when the strike has held so long that the holding has become the news, why they came out at all. They came out against a cut in their wages. The mills cut the wage by 1/10 in the autumn last past, the second cut in the space of a year, upon a workforce that was living, before the cut, at the margin of what a family needs to eat. The strike that began in the cold of January is now in the warmth of May, and the things that have been arrayed against it have not changed. The clubs of the New Jersey police, the injunctions of the courts, the eviction notices, and the steady line of the local press that the whole affair is a Bolshevik importation rather than a quarrel about 1/10 of a wage. What has changed is only that the strike has lasted long enough that Washington can no longer pretend not to see it. The Senate is to take up the matter of Passaic within the week. The strikers have outlasted the winter. They have not yet outlasted the mills. The strike continues. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. From Syria, a document, a notice from the French mandatory authorities, set down in the plain language of administration, warns the quarters of Damascus and the villages of the Ghouta that they may be bombarded without further warning for sheltering the rebels or for failing to pay their fines. From Mexico, a quarrel that wears the dress of religion. The government of Mr. Kai-shek and the Catholic Church move toward open rupture. But the interest that has fixed the attention of Washington is not the altar. And from the British coalfields, the 3rd week of the lockout begins, and the relief from abroad keeps the soup kitchens open while the owners wait. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Tuesday, the 18th of May, 1926. We begin tonight not with a battle, but with a document. It comes by way of the American Consular Service in Syria and it sets down a notice issued by the French mandatory authorities to the people of Damascus and to the villages of the Ghouta, the belt of orchards and farmland that rings the city and has been, through this last year, the country of the revolt. The notice is brief, it is administrative, and it is worth attending to in its own language, because the language is the whole of the thing. It informs the inhabitants that quarters of the city and villages of the countryside may be made subject to coercive measures, including bombardment, and without further warning, should they shelter or assist the rebels, or should they fail to pay the fines that have been levied upon them. Consider that in the flat official phrasing of it, a quarter of a city may be shelled without warning for the non-payment of a fine. That is not the language of war between armies. It is the language of a landlord and a rent book, with the artillery standing in for the bailiff. It is the mandate, the trust, as the League of Nations was pleased to name it, the solemn charge to lead a people toward governing themselves, written down in the form it takes when the people decline the leading. It is worth recalling how France came to hold that trust, and what the Syrians had asked for instead. When the war ended and the Ottoman lands were divided among the victors, the Syrians did not wait to be assigned a guardian. In the spring of 1920, a Congress in Damascus declared the country independent under the Emir Faisal. France answered that declaration in July on the road to Damascus at a pass called Maysalun, where French guns and aircraft destroyed the new state's small army in a single afternoon, and France took up its mandate over the plain objection of the governed. The Druze of the southern mountains were promised a measure of self-rule within the new order. The promise was not kept. A French governor imposed new taxes, demanded forced labor on the roads, and deported the notables who protested. And so, last summer, the Druze rose under Sultan al-Atrash, and the rising spread north into the Horan, and into the Ghouta, and into the streets of Damascus itself, until what had begun as a mountain grievance had become a revolt against the mandate entire. The French answer to that revolt has leaned ever more heavily on the gun and the aeroplane. In October last, the French command turned its artillery upon Damascus itself. 2 days of shelling that broke whole quarters of one of the oldest living cities on the earth, and left, by the counts that reached the outside world, well over 1,000 of its people dead. The bombardment drew condemnation across the world and cost France its High Commissioner, recalled in the embarrassment of it. It did not change the method. The shelling of Damascus was not the excess of one bad general. It was the mandate's way of answering a city that would not consent to it. And the notice that crosses the consul's desk this week is that same method, set down in advance in writing. Next time, it says, there need be no warning at all. So the document holds the whole of it. A people informed that their houses may be broken from the air for the crime of sheltering their own sons, or for the crime of being unable to pay a fine to the power whose aircraft would do the breaking. In Paris, the communiques speak, as they always speak, of order restored and of the burdens of civilization. The notice to the villages of the Ghouta is that same policy, with the courtesies removed. To Mexico, where a quarrel that wears the vestments of religion is, underneath them, a quarrel about something else. The government of President Kai-shek has spent this spring enforcing, for the first time with real vigor, the anti-clerical articles written into the Mexican Constitution of 1917. The articles that stripped the Catholic Church of its lands and its schools, denied it legal standing, and penned its priests and its worship within narrow bounds. Foreign clergy have been expelled. Churches have been closed, and the church hierarchy, which through the long years of the Revolution had mostly declined the fight, has begun to organize resistance in the Catholic country districts of the West. The decree that will bring the matter to its head is expected next month. We will report it when it comes. But it is worth marking on this side of the border which part of the Mexican quarrel has fixed the attention of Washington, and it is not the altar. The same Constitution that confined the church, in its 27th article, declared the oil and the minerals beneath Mexican soil to be the property of the Mexican nation. That article fell upon the American oil companies that had bought their Mexican concessions under the old regime, Doheny's, Sinclair's, Standard's, with the weight of a writ of confiscation. The Secretary of State, Mr. Kellogg, and the American ambassador in Mexico City have spent the better part of a year now treating Mr. Caius's oil policy and his quarrel with the church as a single object, the work, as they describe it, of a Bolshevik government upon the southern border. The church's grievance is real. So are the oil fields. And to the British coal fields, where there is this evening little that is new to report, and a very great deal still at stake. The miners are in the third week of their lockout, and its shape has not altered since we last set it down. The trades that came out beside them are back at their benches. The owners and the government have settled in to wait. And the relief that keeps the soup kitchens lit comes in no small part from the collections of working people abroad, from the Soviet Unions above all, whose latest sum the Moscow press reported only days ago. A lockout makes for poor headlines. It is not settled in an afternoon. It is settled in the slow arithmetic of whose larder empties first. And that arithmetic tonight is precisely what the owners are counting upon. We will keep their count. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. French aircraft were over Damascus again today, one day after the Mandate Authority set their warning down in writing that the villages of the Ghouta and the quarters of the city might be fired upon without further notice. The planes came back over the rooftops. In the south of China, the Nationalist Party has placed a single chairman over its councils for the first time since the death of Sun Yat-sen, and the chair has gone to a wealthy patron of the soldier Chiang Kai-shek. In New Jersey, the textile workers of Passaic hold their picket lines into another week, while in Washington, the Senate makes ready 7 days hence to hear them. And across the Atlantic, the coal miners of Britain are still locked out and still alone. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Wednesday, the 19th of May, 1926. The word from Syria this evening is that French aircraft have once more been over Damascus. The cables of these middle days of May do not all agree upon the day. Some place the heaviest fire on the 7th, some upon the 9th, some upon the city in these last hours. What is not in dispute in any account that has reached us is the thing itself, that through the early and the middle weeks of this month, the capital of Syria and the country around it have lain under French guns and French planes. Only yesterday, this program carried the notices the Mandate authorities had put into writing that the villages of the Ghouta and certain quarters of Damascus might be subjected to bombardment without further warning for the sheltering of rebels or for the non-payment of fines. The Ghouta will mean little to listeners who have never seen it, and it is worth a moment. It is the green belt that rings Damascus, a great oasis of orchards and gardens and watered fields fed by the river Barada as it comes down from the mountains and spends itself in the plain. It is the larder of the city, its apricots and its walnuts, its wheat and its vegetables, the country to which the people of Damascus have looked for their bread for as long as there has been a Damascus. It is also the heartland of the revolt. The gardens that feed the city have sheltered and fed the men who have risen against the mandate. The villages among the orchards are the villages the fighters come from. And so it is the gardens and the villages that the notices name, and the gardens and the villages over which the planes now fly. The city has known this before. In the autumn of last year, French shells fell upon Damascus for 2 days together and laid whole quarters in ruin, a bombardment that drew protest in the chancelleries and the newspapers of Europe, and that cost the French commander his post. The revolt it was meant to break was not broken. It began last summer in the mountains of the Jebel Druze under the leadership of Sultan al-Atrash over new taxes and forced labor and the deportation of the notables who protested them. It spread north and west into the Horan, into the Ghouta, into the quarters of the city itself. And near a year on, it has not been put down. The working-class press abroad has not been silent on Syria. In the spring, the bulletin of the Communist International carried an appeal under the title, "Saved the Lives of 7 Syrian Revolutionaries, the case of men held under French sentence." Damascus and the Ghouta were placed in French keeping by the League of Nations under a mandate whose stated purpose is to make the country ready for its own independence. This is the form that keeping has taken in the month of May. Notices of bombardment, fines laid upon villages, and aircraft over the orchards. From the south of China comes word of a change at the head of the Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang, that holds the city of Canton and the country around it. Since the death of Sun Yat-sen last year, the party that Sun built has been governed not by one man, but by its central committee, sitting as a body. Today, that committee has resolved to set a single chairman over itself, and the chairmanship has gone to a man named Zhang Renjie, not a soldier and not an orator, but a wealthy financier, and for many years the friend and the backer of Chiang Kai-shek, the general who commands the party's army. For listeners who have not followed the affairs of the Kuomintang, a word on how matters stand. Some 3 years ago, the Nationalist Party reorganized itself with the help of advisors sent from Moscow, the chief of them a man known as Borodin. And with Soviet arms and Soviet counsel, it built a military academy at Whampoa, near Canton, with Chiang Kai-shek as its commandant, to train the officers of a national revolutionary army. In the same arrangement, the small Communist Party of China was admitted into the Nationalist Party, its members joining as individuals, an alliance, a united front of nationalists and communists, with the Soviet Republic standing behind it. That alliance still stands, but it stands less easily than it did. When Sun died, the leadership divided. Wang Jingwei on the left of the party, now abroad, others on the right, and Chiang, the man of the army. In March, in Canton, Chiang turned of a sudden upon the communist officers and the Soviet advisors attached to the city's garrison, placed them under arrest, and then released them. The united front did not break, but the warning had been given. And in these past days, the party has set down, in writing, the bounds within which the communists may act inside it. They are not to head its central committees or its departments. Their numbers are to be held to a fixed share, and they are to be entered upon a register. So the account of it, as it stands tonight, is this. The Nationalist Party of China keeps its alliance with the Communists and with Moscow. It has, this month, drawn a fence around the Communists within its own ranks, and the new chairmanship of the party rests with the patron of the man who holds its guns. The purpose of the Canton government has never been a secret, to unseat the warlords who rule the provinces of the north, to bring the country under one nationalist authority, and to be rid of the privileges the foreign powers hold upon Chinese soil. The correspondents of the Communist International have followed it closely under the standing call the movement abroad has raised, "Hands off China." Where the party goes from here, the coming months will show. Across the Atlantic, the coal miners of Britain are still out. It is a week now since the General Council of the Trades Union Congress went down to Downing Street and called off the great strike, the strike of more than 1 million workers who had come out beside the miners and left the miners to carry the dispute alone. The pits stand idle. The men hold to their refusal of the owners' terms, lower wages and longer hours. And the owners, who have the courts and the government beside them, need do nothing now but wait. That is the whole of the change today, which is to say there is none. The lockout goes on in its slow and grinding way as it has gone on since the first day of the month. And at home, in the mill town of Passaic in New Jersey, the textile strike holds. Some 16,000 workers, the most of them immigrants, Polish and Hungarian and Italian and Slav, a great many of them women, have been out of the woolen mills since the winter, against a cut in their wages. Their strike is led by the communists under a young organizer named Albert Weisbord, and it has been met as such strikes are met in this country, with the clubs of the police, with injunctions out of the courts, with families put out of the company houses, and with a press that calls a wage strike a Bolshevik plot. It has also lasted. It has lasted long enough and grown large enough that the Senate of the United States will take notice of it. A week from now in Washington, the Senate's Committee on Education and Labor is to hold a hearing upon the strike at Passaic. That a strike led by communists of immigrant mill hands should compel a hearing in the Senate of the United States is itself a measure of what the people of Passaic have made by refusing through the winter and into the spring to go back. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs signing off for the night. In Washington this evening, President Coolidge has signed 2 laws with a single day's pen. By the first, the Air Commerce Act, the business of the air passes for the first time under the hand of the federal government. Its pilots to be licensed, its craft certified, its airways charted and kept. By the second, the Railway Labor Act, the government takes up the long quarrel of the railroads and lays down new machinery to keep the peace between the carriers and the men who run the trains. In New Jersey, the textile strike at Passaic holds into another month, and the Senate at Washington makes ready to hear it. Across the Atlantic, the coal miners of Britain hold on, locked out and alone, 8 days now since the general strike was called off. And from Massachusetts and the wider world beyond it, the cause of Sacco and Vanzetti widens, 8 days after the Commonwealth's High Court denied the 2 men a new trial. In Morocco, the Rif Republic fights on alone, its peace talks broken, and 2 empires pressing it in concert. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Thursday, the 20th of May, 1926. The new law is, in plain terms, a charter for an industry. It puts the nation's airmen under federal license. It brings their aircraft under federal regulation. And it lodges a new authority, an aeronautics branch, with the Secretary of Commerce, Mr. Hoover, to write the rules of the air and to see them kept. Consider how readily that authority was found. The aeroplane is a young thing, younger than a good many of the men who fly it. And already the federal government has reached out to it, drawn it a code, and built it a bureau to administer that code, so that the new industry of the air may grow in good order, and so that the capital ventured upon it may have the surety of law. Where new money needs the steadiness that only the state can give, the state has been quick to give it. Now, set beside that, the matters the same federal government has not found the means to reach. It fixes no floor beneath the wage of the man who rivets the frame of an aeroplane, nor beneath the woman who tends the worsted loom. It sets no limit upon the hours that such a worker may be held to the bench. It writes no federal guard upon the machine that takes a hand or an arm or a life and sends the maimed man home without his week's pay. These things it leaves to the several states, which see to them unevenly or do not see to them at all. And where the Congress has tried to do more, it has been turned back. When the Congress moved in years not long past to keep the labor of young children out of the mills, the High Court struck the law down. Such a reach it held lay beyond the power of the nation. And a wage that a woman might live upon, fixed in the federal capital itself, that same court found to be an offense against the liberty of contract. So the law is written tonight for the airway and found wanting for the loom. The federal hand that this evening reaches up to license the pilot and certify his craft has not in all these years reached down to set a price below which a day's labor may not be bought. That is the law as it stands. The reach that charts the air has found no path to the factory floor. The factory floor is not a figure of speech. In Passaic, in the state of New Jersey, some 16,000 textile workers still hold the picket line they first took up in January against the cutting of their wages. Theirs is among the largest strikes the country has running tonight, and it is one the American Federation of Labor would not put its name to. In the coming week, the Senate's Committee on Education and Labor is to take up the matter of Passaic in Washington. The strike has grown large enough and lasted long enough that the Senate must at last sit and look at it for a day. What the looking will yield, no one on the line in Passaic can say, but the hearing is set. In Massachusetts, the case of Nicholas Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti stands where the court left it 8 days ago, when the Commonwealth's High Court denied the two men their motions for a new trial. But the case long ago ceased to be a Massachusetts matter, or a matter only for lawyers. In cities across this country and across the ocean, meetings are called in their names. The labor bodies, the Workers' Party, the defense leagues, and no small number of writers and professors have made what the two men's defenders call the Massachusetts frame-up their own cause. It widens by the week. From Morocco, where the Rif Republic fights on, alone, and against two empires at once. At the beginning of this month, the peace talks at Oujda between Abd el-Krim's envoys and the French broke down over the exchange of prisoners, among other matters, after some 3 weeks of negotiation. Since then, the combined offensive has resumed. France presses from the south, Spain from the north and the coast, the two in concert. Their forces in the field are reckoned above 100,000 men, with the aircraft and the artillery to match, against defenders who may count, by the most generous reckoning, perhaps a tenth of that number. The Rif's supply roads are cut, and its territory is pressed from every side. 5 years ago, the tribesmen of these mountains destroyed a Spanish army. This month, they stand against two powers acting together. The wires from Fez and from Madrid say little this week. What they do say is that the ring has grown tighter. And from the continent, a smaller note to close the night. In Brussels, the cabinet crisis that opened earlier this month is closed. The government of Mr. Poulet, having fallen, gives way to a successor, and Belgium has a ministry once more. It is the kind of change the continent has had occasion to make often this year. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night. Into its 4th month, the textile strike at Passaic still holds. 16,000 workers of the New Jersey mills out since the depth of winter against a cut laid upon wages that were thin to begin with, and answered through these months with the club, the injunction, and the eviction. Tonight brings no fresh blow and no surrender, and behind that standing line is a longer history, one that runs back 14 years to another mill town and another hard winter. In Geneva, the delegates of some 20 nations have sat down together to prepare the disarmament of the world, Germany among them, and America. Soviet Russia, invited, has stayed away. And in Paris, the franc falls and prices climb behind it. And from Mexico, the quarrel between the government of Mr. Kai-shek and the Catholic Church moves another step toward open rupture. This is Tribune of the Plebs, the news of the day given whole. Friday, the 21st of May, 1926. We have set the Passaic strike before you already this week, and tonight there is no fresh event to add to the account. What the day offers instead is room to ask an older question. Where does such a strike come from? Passaic is not a thing without ancestors. What is being tested on that picket line has been tested before, in the same trade, by the same kind of workers, and the country told itself, then as now, that the trouble was the work of foreign agitators rather than of hunger. To see plainly what Passaic is, it helps to remember Lawrence. 14 years ago, in the woolen city of Lawrence, Massachusetts, the same kind of workers struck the same kind of mills. It was the dead of winter, 1912. A cut in pay, the mill's answer to a new Massachusetts law that shortened the working week for the women and children of the mills. Fewer hours and less in the pay envelope to match brought tens of thousands of textile workers into the streets, immigrants of a dozen nationalities, women prominent among them, a great many of them unable to speak to one another except through some third tongue. The strike was led not by the respectable unions, but by the industrial workers of the world, the organization the press of the day treated as a foreign infection. It was a hard fight. The militia was called out. A striker named Anna Lopizzo was shot dead, and the strike's own leaders were charged with her killing on the theory that their words had done it. And when the strikers, unable to feed their children through a long winter walkout, began sending the little ones away by train to be kept by sympathizers in other cities, the authorities moved to stop even that, and the sight of police clubbing women and children at the railway station did more to shame the mills before the country than any speech could have done. And the workers won. They won the wage increase. They won for a season the thing the banners are remembered for asking: bread, and roses, too. Lawrence proved what the owners had sworn was impossible, that the immigrant working class, written off as unorganizable, divided by language and fresh off the boat, could in fact stand together and win. And the winning did not stop at the city line. Mills across New England, fearing the same medicine, raised wages in Lawrence's wake. Why did it fall to the industrial workers of the world to do that, and not to the great established body of American labor? The answer is the oldest division in the House of Labor itself, and it is the same division that leaves Passaic to fight alone tonight. The American Federation of Labor is built upon the craft, the skilled trade, the man who has served his apprenticeship and carries a skill the employer cannot easily replace. It organizes the machinist, the carpenter, the printer, each by his trade, and from that skill comes the bargaining power of the union. But the woolen mill does not run on craft. It runs on the mass, on thousands of hands tending machines built precisely so that an unskilled worker, a woman, a newcomer with no English, could be set to them within a week. There is no apprenticeship to withhold. To organize such a place, you cannot organize the craft, because there is no craft to organize. You must take the whole mass of the mill together, skilled and unskilled, every nationality on the floor, into one body. That is industrial unionism. It was the method the IWW brought to Lawrence, and it is the method the communist organizers have brought to Passaic now. The Federation has never made its peace with that method. At Lawrence, the craft unions kept their distance from the foreigners and the radicals. At Passaic, the Federation stands aside again, and it says plainly why. The strike is led by communists, by the organizers of the Workers' Party, and the Federation will not lend its name to such a leadership. So the strongest House of Labor in the country keeps to its own side of the line on the question of who is doing the leading, while immigrant women are ridden down by mounted police in a New Jersey mill town. The working class on that line is divided three ways at once: by craft, by language, and by the difference between the respectable union and the red one. There is a reason the wage was cut at Passaic in the first place, a reason that reaches well beyond one company's ledger. The years since the war have been hard ones for the organized worker in America. The great drive of the employers through this decade has gone under a hopeful name, the open shop, the American plan, and its plain object has been to keep the union out of the plant and the wage soft. Where labor was strong, it was pressed back. Where it was weak, as among the unorganized immigrants of the textile towns, the wage could simply be cut, and cut again, with little standing in the way. The unions themselves count fewer members at the middle of this decade than they counted at its start. The drive has had its effect. Passaic is what that decade looks like at its far end. The hours shortened first, then the wage cut a tenth outright, laid upon the workers with the least power to refuse it, until they refused it anyway. The strike has at least grown too large to be ignored. A committee of the Senate at Washington is to take the matter up before the month is out. What that sitting will yield, no one on the picket line can say. What is being tested there is whether the lesson of Lawrence still holds. In Geneva this week, the powers are talking of disarmament. A commission of the League of Nations, preparatory it is called, to a general conference yet to be scheduled, has been sitting since Tuesday, with the delegates of some 20 nations at the table. The list of the company is the news. Germany sits among the powers that disarmed her. The United States, which never joined the League, has sent its men to this table. Soviet Russia, invited to it, has stayed away. What the Commission is charged to prepare is the reduction of the armaments of the world. Set beside its agenda stand the month's other items as this broadcast has carried them. The guns at Warsaw, the aircraft over Damascus, the campaign pressing upon the Rif. The powers will discuss the instruments. The month has gone on using them. From Paris, a matter not of guns, but of money, though France is learning this spring that the two are never far apart. The franc is falling. It has fallen for months, and the fall has quickened. The dollar and the pound buy more francs week upon week, and prices in the shops climb behind the exchange like smoke behind a fire. The government of Mr. Briand meets the slide with reassurances the exchange does not believe. Behind the falling figure stands the war's unpaid bill, the debts, the rebuilding of the devastated North, the taxes never raised to cover either, and the franc is where the argument over who shall pay has come to rest. We will follow it. To Mexico, where the long quarrel between the revolutionary state and the Catholic Church draws toward an open break, a quarrel we have set down before, with the oil beneath it, and the reading in Washington that treats Mr. Caius's oil policy and his quarrel with the Church as a single Bolshevik design. What is new tonight is not the quarrel, but its hardening. The Constitution's strictures upon the Church are 9 years old, and for most of that time they sat unenforced, the governments before Mr. Caius preferring not to provoke the fight. He has chosen otherwise, so that what is moving in Mexico is, at bottom, no quarrel about doctrine. It is the old question of whether the Church keeps the land, the schools, and the power it held under the old regime, and a revolutionary state's answer to it. We will report it as it comes. That has been the full report of the day. This is Tribune of the Plebs, signing off for the night.